All right, students, welcome back. Welcome back for another SAT comprehensive review. I get dog hair. My dog is crazy. Got dog hair all over me. Welcome back, guys. I hope you guys have been doing well since the last time you tuned in here. If this is the first time you guys are joining us, I'm Chase. I will be your host slash instructor for the evening. I hope you guys are doing well. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. Today we'll be going through the SAT, each section of the SAT, as well as the scoring and the scales. As we always talk about, that's probably the most important thing as we continue to approach this test and how we're approaching this test. When you guys get into the live stream today, when you guys see the chat, can everybody give me a thumbs up? If you don't see the chat, well, you should see the chat, but if you don't, it should be in the top right-hand corner. You might have to subscribe. You do have to subscribe to the channel, I think, to get the live chat. And then you guys can ask questions there. But give me a thumbs up. Yeah, and subscribe to the channel, guys, if you haven't already. I think you guys are going to like what you see today and like what you hear, hopefully. And just click the subscribe button below the video. If you have been with us before and you've liked these live streams, please don't hesitate to spread the word, tell your friends. The more students that we can get into these live streams, guys, the better opportunity we have to do more of these. So again, guys, please make sure that you're helping us spread the word. We want to do more of this. We want to do this really full time, and when we get to a point that we feel we can do that, we're going to. So that just requires more students, and we hope all you guys can help us spread the word there. But again, as you get in, please make sure that you give me just say hello in the chat. Just say that you're there. If you prefer not to say anything in the chat, just give me a thumbs up below the video. So there should be a thumbs up, just so we know how many people are here, who's here, all that good stuff. Abriana, welcome. Welcome, welcome. Guys, the other thing too, below this, I posted a number of helpful resources, including a link to all of the real SAT exam. So make sure that you guys check out the description below this video. You guys can open that up and see the description for that. And yeah, and then we'll get started. Does anybody have any preliminary questions about the SAT before we get going? It can be relatively specific, guys. If I feel like it's too specific, then make sure that you comment below this video. We'll talk about that towards the end. But if it's very specific and it's very to the point that it would probably only relate to you, then just make sure that you comment below the video, and if we don't answer it tonight, we'll make sure that one of our teachers or tutors answers that question when we see that come up below the video. So again, guys, as you get into the review tonight, just make sure you say hello or give us a thumbs up, just so I can address you if you have questions. If you don't feel like posting in the chat, then just give us a thumbs up below the video so we know that everybody's here participating, just like Abriana did. If you guys see that in the chat. Or if you guys don't feel like participating, just give us a thumbs up below the video so that we know who's here and that you guys can hear me and that you're paying attention and all that good stuff. Okay, guys, so for today, we're going to be talking first about the scales and the scoring, as we always do, and the importance of being very task-oriented. Hey, Spencer, welcome. The importance of being very task-oriented as we approach this SAT exam. So this is the SAT Test 6 scales and scoring. Okay, so guys, the link that I just posted in the group, that's where we'll start today. That's for SAT test number 6. It's the scale and the scoring for that. So as soon as you guys open that up, you'll see that also in the background of my screen in just a second. And that's where we'll start. We'll start with talking about the scale and just how important it is to approach this exam in a certain way. Okay, because the one thing that we always get going with this in our programs, and the one thing that's just so critical for all of you guys, is to make sure that you're not feeling overwhelmed as you start the test. So for many of you, there's an April in-school SAT this coming Tuesday. I think most of you guys are probably tuning in because you're planning to take that. And if you are, the way that we want to approach that, again, that's in a couple days here, the way that we want to approach that is very specific to how you approach a school test. We don't want to approach it in the terms of how am I going to score, how am I going to do. The way that we want to approach this is very similar and very, very routine to what you guys would see in school. And when you approach an exam, a standardized test that way, whether it be the SAT, the ACT, or an AP exam, you will find that your scores will go up and up and up because of the way that this is a very task-oriented approach. Okay, so we're going to start with the scales and scoring. If you can open the link that I just posted, that would be great. Okay, so open that scales and scoring link that I just posted. I'll pin it to the top as long as we're discussing it. But the message, guys, that's pinned to the top as well. You guys can see it there. Hey, Jose, welcome. Okay, guys, thanks for tuning in, everybody. We're gonna open this up with SAT test number 6, scales and scoring. So you guys will see this on my screen now in the background. If everybody opens up to page 7, so please open that link that I just posted. This is the scale for SAT test 6. Open that link for me. Okay. And we're going to be very focused on how this test is graded, how this test is scored, and we're gonna try to get everybody here tonight that's watching, or everybody that watches the recording, because I know there's several students that are going to be doing that. We're going to try to get you guys all to approach this exam for next Tuesday in a way that's much more meaningful and much less stressful. Far less anxiety will come with this if you look at a test like this, if you look at the test this way. I say it all the time, if you guys haven't joined us before, that part of the reason this has worked so well, and it's so unique, I think, to what other companies do. I worked for a number of companies before we started Star Tutors, and one of the things that was always shocking to me is that never in the training, never anything in the approach, was there anything mentioned about how this test was scored and just how different it is from how it's scored on a school test, right? So when you guys look at this score, can everybody give me a thumbs up in the chat? Everybody give me a thumbs up to say that you guys have the scale for test number 6 open, and you're looking at this page, which is page 7 of the scoring guide. And we always start with this because we can make it so that it's far, far, far less complicated, right, than what you might experience when you're just trying to get a score. Because this test is not scored in the traditional way that school is, but we can make it that way, and that's how we're going to try to approach it. So everybody, please give me a thumbs up. Great, thanks, Abriana. Give me a thumbs up in the chat or below the video if you guys are ready to go here. Okay, and that you're looking at page 7. Dima, thank you. So guys, as you look at this, when you prepare for the SAT exam, none of you have ever been in a position where you've been graded on a 1600 scale, right? This is out of 1600. Okay? That has never occurred ever in your lives, ever. You've never been graded. I can't think of one other thing that you'd be graded at a 1600 today, right? Nothing in the past or anything going forward in the future. So if we think about this test in terms of a 1600, we're thinking about it in a way that doesn't mean anything to us, right? I got to get an 800 on the math section. Well, okay. Other than an 800, which is the perfect score, everything below that, you're not thinking of it as like, what does it mean to get a 760? What does it mean to get a 550? Right? What does it actually correspond to? And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to approach this in a way that you would approach a school test. But the beauty of the SAT is that it gives you start off with a major advantage to what you would see on a school test. And again, this is what I understood as a good test taker as a kid. I always say that I was a horrible student, but I was a great test taker because I understood the scales. When I was a kid, right, when I was taking a school test on a final, my thought was never, how do I get an A+ in the class, right? How do I do really well in this class? It was, how do I keep a B- and get a B- on the final so that I don't get grounded, right, by my parents and not be able to go out that weekend and see my friends. That was always my thought. And while that is a horrible, horrible approach for school, and it's not one that any of you guys should take because it ultimately is just laziness and complacency, not a good approach in anything. While that doesn't work on most things, it does work on this test because of the way that it's graded. And that's what we need to understand. And the moment that you guys understand that is the moment that you do really well. Because I knew going into all of these exams, just like I knew going into my finals, the exact score I needed to get, the exact number of questions I needed to answer in order to attain a certain score. Right? So if I want to get a 1500 on the SAT, or if I want to get a 34 on the ACT, I knew what that number looked like. I knew how many questions I needed to answer on each section of the test so that I could obtain that score. And what you guys are going to see, right, if we look at this exam, let's look at the math score, right? So this math section is really important because of the way that it's scored. This is the most complicated of the 4 sections in terms of scoring because what you guys will notice is that this section is out of 58, but we're thinking, wait a second, section number 3 is out of 20. Why aren't there 4 sections? I thought I was taking 4 sections on this test. Well, you are, but the math no calc section and the math calculator section, right? Math no calc, math calc, math with calc, are just a combined score. I'm sure most of you guys know this, but let's break down what that would mean then. So, right, you have 20 questions on the no calc, and you have 38 questions in the calculator section. So what does that mean, right? Again, we always think, how am I going to increase my score? What am I going to do to get better? I got to get this score to get into this school. I got to get this score in order to get a whatever scholarship, right? If you think that way, it's way too much pressure. Versus if you think, okay, there are 58 questions. The math, 2 sections of the math test are added together, meaning that there are 58 total questions available on the math test, right? 58 total questions. And as you guys can see, every single question on this test is worth 10 points. If you don't believe me, and again, this is, right, over time, you just start to pick up on these things. There's 1,600 points available on the SAT. There are 154 total questions, 154. Meaning that it's approximately, right, 10 points per question. 10 points per question. And why I bring this up, guys, is because it means that every single question on the math sections is worth the same value. Every single one of those. Okay, so if you're the type of person that doesn't like the no calculator section, that doesn't mean you should give up if that doesn't go very well. It's the exact opposite, right? Not only is the math with the calculator section worth twice as many points, there's twice as many questions available, 38 versus 20, but every single one of those questions that you give up on is just costing you 10 points. Right? So I know that there's a thought here then that's like, well, I don't want to give up. It's not like I want to give up. I just, I get tired, or I lose some momentum, or I get stuck on a hard question. Right? Well, let's figure out a way not to get stuck on hard questions. Let's find a way that when you are tired, and you are tired, there's nothing we can do about that. Focusing for 3.5 hours on a really important test is going to make you tired. So this section, that math with the calculator, you're going to feel stressed. Right? It's going to feel stressful solely because you're running low on energy. You're going to get to that point. But watch what happens, guys. Let's say we want to get a 650 on the math section, okay? And the reason we use test number 6 here, this is the score for test number 6, is because this is a pretty even score. This test number 6 is not too hard of a test. It's also not too easy. It's a pretty good scale. Same with test number 7. Okay, so these are the SAT test 6s and 7s that you guys will see. And these are pretty good scales. So test 6, test 7 are pretty good. And that's why we're using test 6 tonight. And let's say I want to get a 650 on this test. Well, lo and behold, if I want to get a 650, right, which would be minus 150 points, it's 15 questions, 10 points per question. But that's less important than figuring out, okay, if I need 43, right, to get a 650 on the math section, we're not going to think about this after we get that number, right? After we get 43 is corresponding to a 650, which is pretty true of every math test, right? After we get this number, we're no longer going to think about the 650. We're going to be very, very focused on how do I get 43 questions right on this test? How do I get 43 questions right? And if we can do that, we're in great shape. Think about the lack of stress. Can everybody give me 2 thumbs up if this makes sense in the chat? 2 thumbs up if this makes sense, that if you have 43 questions that you want to answer, this 650 here, right, is equivalent to a top, let's call it top 7% math score. If you get a 650 plus, right, you're top 7%. That's incredible. You're in the top 7% at a 650, and we'll talk about that here in just a second as well. So if you do that, you can skip 15 questions, right? Completely skip. You can skip 15 questions on the math test and still earn a 650. So my question to you is, if every question is worth the same value, why in the world would we spend a single second or a single ounce of energy focused on a question that we don't know how to do anyway, right? If you don't know how to do X, Y, Z topic on the math section, let's say it's, I don't know, you don't remember the quadratic formula. That's a hard one to remember, right? If you don't remember that, then by no means should we sit there and focus and try to remember it. That causes us stress. It causes us anxiety. It is what it is in the moment. You got to get over it. You got to push through that. You got to say, you know what? I should have known this. I remember. That's where all the hard work outside of class will pay dividends. That's what I wish I would have had as a kid, was that hard work, that work ethic to keep pushing forward even when I had reached a strong score, right? To say to myself, okay, this isn't my max. Okay, it might be good, but it's not my max. I can keep pushing forward. I wish I would have done that as a kid, and that's all the hard work. That's where all the hard work pays off outside of the test. But when you get into the test, I had the biggest advantage over every other student because I didn't think about college, I didn't think about the next day, let alone college, right? It was literally like, what do I need to do to just get through the day so that I don't have to think about school today, right? That was truly my mindset. And while that, again, is horrible, it's a horrible mindset of laziness and complacency. On a test like this, when I sat down next to a student who had been studying, right, and was really engaged with this test, and I wasn't, I was totally fine skipping the hardest question. My reason for skipping it was out of laziness, right? I don't want to think too hard, right? Which was so dumb. But it still equated to being able to skip a lot of questions. If you want to get 700 on the math test, I mean, think about this. A 700 on the math test is in the top 3% of all students. Top 3% of all students that take the math. If you get a 700, you can skip 9 problems. Skip the 9 hardest questions. Look, 49 out of 58. If you do the math on that, right? 49 out of 58. If you do that quick math, that's like 83%, maybe somewhere around there. 83%. That's a B to a B. Let's call it a B minus in school. I just told you guys that that's a 97% on this math test. Top 3% if you get to a 700. That is insane. So why in the world, if I know I can skip 9 questions, like think about that. Imagine what your teacher would say. If your math teacher today, when you were taking a final and your teacher was like, okay, there's 58 questions. All I want you to do is answer 49 of those questions accurately with 100% accuracy. And if you do that, I'll give you a 97 on this math final, even though you feel like it's a B minus. I'll give you a 97. You'd be like, teacher's going crazy today, but yeah, that sounds pretty good, right? That was the dream scenario for me, and amazingly, the ACT and the SAT did exactly that. And so if I wanted to get a 760 on the math test, I knew even at 760, at these very, very high scores, that I could still skip the 4 hardest questions that I didn't know how to do. Skip 4, right? Even at these ridiculously high levels of testing, you could skip 4 questions and still get a 760, which would put you in the top, I don't know, 0.5% of all students that take the exam. Think about that lack of stress. Think about what that takes off. Okay, how much effort and anxiety and stress that removes from the equation. So if we're looking at a 43 out of 58, right? 43 out of 58 on the math test. Right? That would be the equivalent of a 75%, somewhere around 75. That would be a C in school. Okay? On this test, I told you that this was an A minus to an A. A minus to an A on this math test on the SAT. Think about that. Can everybody give me another thumbs up if that makes sense? 2 thumbs up, guys, if this makes sense. And the key to this whole exam is not being too proud, right? We can't be too proud. And what I mean by that is high-level students especially will always sit there and be like, well, I can do this one. I can challenge myself. Because that's how you've always approached it in school. And for anybody that's ever been out there that's like, I'm a great student, but I just can't figure out this test taking, that is the primary reason. Because in school, there's a feeling of like, I got to get all of this work done. And that is such a great trait. Do not lose your work ethic. That is so much more important than being a great test taker. And I learned that later than I should have, and then I had to play catch up. So don't think that you're, by doing all this work, that you're falling behind, that you're missing something that other students are picking up. No. We need to change your mindset on one day of the year. Every other time of the year, that works great, right? Put in the hard work. It even works as it relates to this test. Put in the work, learn the content, all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to test day, we got to tweak that. And we got to have a goal score number in mind, right? A goal number in mind. How many questions do I need to answer in order to get an XYZ score? That's what we got to be thinking about. That's how we have to approach this. Okay, so 43, right? 43 questions out of 58 gets us a 650. If you're at a point where, if you don't like math, but you're really good at reading and writing and language, and you're trying to still maximize your overall score, and you just don't want to let math like bring you down, then focus, right? 32 out of 58 questions. The problem that we have with students is that students, that to get a 550 is a way above the national average. A 550 on the math test is in like the top 30% of all students. So it's 20 percentage points above the national average, right? that means that you can skip 26 questions, minus 26 questions that you don't want to do in order to obtain a 550. I mean, again, guys, how great is that? That's incredible. That is absolutely incredible that we can do that. And that's exactly what the SAT is giving you. So again, when we get to the math review tonight, we're going to talk a lot about this 3-pass method, right? That the Star Tutors 3-pass math method. If you guys have watched any of our videos, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, we'll talk about it tonight, so stay tuned. But the idea behind that is to get you into a situation where you are maximizing your score because you're focused on accuracy and you're not focused on time or simply finishing every question. Those are the two biggest deterrents that we always see from students, because in a school test, there's typically not really a time limit. You know, like teachers are like, oh, you can go into lunch, right? Keep practicing. That doesn't exist on the SAT. Pencils down. If you don't put your pencil down in a relative, you can have 30 seconds probably. But if you keep writing after a minute, the teacher's just going to take your exam form and you're kicked out of the exam, right? So you have a little bit of buffer room. They're not going to take it if you're just filling out the last part of the question, but they will be upset if you keep doing that, right? And keep. So you have 15 seconds. That's not a typical thing you see in school. And then more importantly, in school on a final, we don't get this percentage bump, right? If I skip an entire free response question on my math final, I know I'm going to get at best an 80%. That is not how this exam works. So we have to overcome that. We have to recognize that, and we have to practice it. Because if we don't, we're just going to put ourselves into a position where there's too much stress, too much anxiety. Oh, I got to get all 58 questions done. Not a chance. No, you don't. You have to get the number of questions that you set for your goal, and you have to stick to that, and you have to maintain 100% accuracy on those questions. Okay? Any questions related to the scale? Because there's more, right? I always talk about this. It's like Billy Mays. You guys are too young, probably. Daniela, yeah, so this is all preparation for Tuesday. Think about this, guys. This recording is also going to be up. We also are coming out with, for anybody that watches our channel regularly, we have 2 more of those real-time SAT videos that we do, right, where I sit there and take the full practice test in time. These ones are going to be particularly unique because I tried to go through them as fast as I could just to show you how the benefits of doing the preparation, of learning your grammar rules, of learning your math rules. If you learn those things, this test becomes exceptionally easy. So check out those videos when it comes up. But any questions generally related to the math test? Because the final thing that I want to leave you guys with is that there is more. It's like, again, it's like a Billy Mays infomercial. You guys are too young to remember that, I'm sure. But Billy Mays used to do like if you buy it now, I don't even know if infomercials exist anymore, but if you buy it in the next 20 minutes, you get 2 for $19.99. Remember that guy with the slap chop? He had that little microphone. You guys are probably old enough to remember that guy at least. Right? He was like a slap chop guy, and he'd be like, if you buy it in slap chop, right? If you buy it in the next 3 days, I'll throw in a new car. Right? Honestly, that's kind of how the SAT feels. Any questions, though, so far? Can everybody give me a good to go in the chat? If all of this stuff makes sense, what we're trying to accomplish here, setting a number and putting a number of questions that we want to answer correctly in mind, setting a reasonable goal based on our previous practice test, not setting a goal that's 100 points higher from our last practice test, because then again, the anxiety, then you're not accomplishing what I'm trying to get you to accomplish. You're setting a goal score that's unrealistic, and it's just going to make you so stressed. So take your highest practice test score and maybe add 20 points to that. And that's the goal number of questions you should answer. So if you're at a 650, right, if you've gotten a 650 on a recent practice test, then maybe set your goal between 650 and 670, somewhere in there, which means that you're looking to get 43 to 45 questions right out of all the questions available on the math test. Okay, so again, everybody to this point, can you guys give me a good to go? And then my second question to everybody as we continue with this scale idea, so good to go in the chat first, or just give me a thumbs up, whichever one's easier, good to go, thumbs up, so that I know you guys are ready and you're paying attention. And the second thing is, does anybody know what's the other thing that we want to address is what's the biggest difference between the SAT exam and any test that you take in school? Or generally speaking, right? So there are a few tests, but generally speaking, there is a massive difference between the SAT and the ACT exam versus something that you would see in school. And what is that difference? What do we think? What's that major difference? Because once you recognize this, once you recognize the second major difference and you combine it with everything we just talked about in terms of scoring and the scales, now you're so far ahead of everybody else that sits down. Brianna, exactly, right? And you and I have discussed this before, right? It's a multiple choice test. That is such a major difference. The vast majority of the questions, there's 154 questions on this SAT that you guys are going to see on Tuesday. 141 of those questions are multiple choice. There's a few math free response questions, as you guys know, for those that have taken practice tests before. But there's only 13 of those. So the vast majority of this exam is going to be multiple choice. So what does that mean? Well, the easiest way to explain it is that you have a major advantage. If you approach the test this way, you have such a major advantage psychologically over every other student that has never seen these videos. And I know that because every single video I've ever seen on this topic, I've worked for big companies in this industry, I've worked for small, I've never seen this approach. And that's why we ended up starting this company, was because this seemed like the most important thing, yet it was never discussed. It never was trained to us. And as I saw more of this, I realized how important this would be for students. That discussing the formatting and understanding what the stress and those things that you guys go through on test day that I'm very aware of are things that we need to discuss. We need to figure that out because this is a 70% psychological test and a 30% content test. And I know that because on the writing and language test, they test you on basic punctuation rules. That's like a 5th or 6th grade topic. It doesn't mean that you know them all right now. You might have to review them, right? It's boring to review. You might not have remembered it from whoever, Mr. and Mrs. whatever, 6th grade English class, but it's really easy to review. If they wanted to make this a content test, they could just make the AP Calculus exam the way to get into college, right? They could just do that. But they don't for a reason, because this is a 70% psychological exam. It's if I get pushed into a corner, if I feel stressed, what's my response going to be? Am I going to keep pushing forward? Am I going to find the next easy question so that my momentum picks up again? Or am I just going to give up? And that's what you need to see. If you go to Harvard, you're going to be competing. If you go to Harvard, you're going to be competing against some of the smartest students in the country. They need to know that you're not going to just back away and you're going to just fail out, because that's the worst thing for a college. More than anything else, they don't want to have a stat on their books that says 30% of our students drop out. That would be a horrible stat for them. And so they need to show that you're going to be okay when you get to school, and that's why these tests remain important. If we really want to break down why these are important, that's the reason. And so as Adriana alluded to, which is so important, you guys get this massive advantage if you approach this exam in a way that makes you think, I can guess, I can skip questions and still answer a few correctly. As an example, okay, let's just break it down, and I'll move over to the reading section now for a second, just because it's easier, okay, so that we're not just only talking about math. If I look at the reading test, guys, everyone's always like, oh, the reading section is so hard. It is. Get over it, right? That's what we have to think about. It is really hard. I can't agree with you guys more. The reading section, I read all the time, which is a point that you guys should be making for yourselves. If you don't read a lot, you are at a disadvantage on this test. You've got to read more. You don't have to start by reading, Don Quixote tonight, an 800-page book, but just go read an essay, right? Read something each day. It will help immensely on this exam. But it's a multiple choice test. So look, guys, if I want to get, by the way, this is such a ridiculous thing about the SAT, and again, I don't want to get too much into this, but I have no idea. When you guys score your test, they for some reason, they don't just put 400, right? 40, they put 40, and then they make you multiply by 10. It's like, why not just make this out of 390, right? So these should all be zeros, right? And the writing and language and the reading test are combined, so 400 for writing, 400 for reading first, right? And then 400 for writing and language equates to 800, and that's your 800 score for the RWL or verbal section of the test. So these are all, if you're looking at the scale, guys, you guys can just write this in. This is really out of 400 if you get all 52 questions right. So reading right here is 52 total questions on that exam. You get a 400. And what you'll notice about the reading test is while it is the hardest, it's also the most favorably scaled for you. Because if you get 400 points, if you miss a question on reading, you still get a 400. And that's true for most reading sections. It's the most favorably scaled because it is the hardest. They know it's the hardest. Nobody gives enough credit, and the College Board does some really dumb things, as I just showed you, but they are really smart people. There are really, really smart people that work for the College Board that are creating these tests. Again, for better or for worse, if these, there's arguments to be made on both sides about whether or not these tests should be included for college admissions, but either way, there are really smart people creating these exams at the College Board and at the ACT. Administratively, they do some really dumb things, but in terms of these tests, it is a very good representation of what you're going to see in college, and that sitting there for 3 hours and staying focused. Okay, and why I want to show you guys that is because they know that the reading test is the hardest, which is why it's the most favorably scaled, right? Guys, look at this. On the reading test, if you know that it's the hardest section, if you answer 3 passages, okay, on reading, there are 5 total passages, 5 passages with 10 to 11 questions each. Okay? If you guys take this exam and you think and you know this score, think about how crazy this is. On the reading test, if you score a 300, right? 300 on the reading test, right? That's the equivalent of like a top, I don't know, maybe 15% score, 300. Out of 300, guys, you can miss 15 questions out of 52. 15, right? You can skip 15 questions. Watch this. Watch how crazy this is, as Adrian alluded to. Okay? And this is, it's just so critical at every level of the test that you guys approach it this way. That if there's 10 to 11 questions per passage on the reading section, that means that generally, this is the 32 question mark on reading, right? 32 out of 52 is meaning you got 3 passages done. The ACT, the ACT one, guys, is next Thursday, same time, or I think it's an hour earlier. But the ACT lesson 1 is an hour earlier, an hour later, next Thursday for April. Okay, but guys, look at this. If you get 32 out of 52 questions right, you finish 3 passages. And you're like, well, that's horrible in school. That 3 passages out of 5, that means I got a 60%. If you are accurate on those 32 questions, and then you come back up here and you choose a guessing letter, and you guess that same exact letter all the way down, right? So you get to 32 questions, and you're 32 for 32 at that point in the test. Boom, 32 for 32. And I'll tell you why you can do that. You're like, well, I never get all 32 right. Well, the goal is that we're taking the time from the last 2 passages and applying it to the first 3, and then we have all the time in the world for the first 3 passages to guarantee accuracy, right? That's our goal. So we're guaranteeing accuracy. We get to 32 questions, we're 32 for 32 because we've taken all the stress and time away from doing 5 passages, and we've put it towards the other 32 questions in the other 3 passages. And now we're going to sit here and we just sit there and guess the same letter the rest of the way down. And the guessing letter that you choose, right? A, B, C, or D, you stick with that letter all the way. Now, psychologically, that's really difficult to do. Because if you pick the same letter all the way down, what do we know is going to happen? What's definitely going to happen if we pick the same letter? Who's got the answer to that? Why is this so psychologically difficult to do? To literally fill in your bubbles like this, all the way down. Why is that hard to do? Okay? But there's a way. That whatever letter you choose, to just don't make it the one that you've used the most. Watch what I mean by this. Up until this point in the test, we have this many A's, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 A's. So up until that point, there's already been 9 A's. And what you'll notice at the end of this test is that there's not very many A's remaining. 1A here, 1A here, 1A here, right? So there's 12. Yeah, Adrian, exactly. We know some of these answer choices will be wrong. More will be wrong than will be right if we choose the same letter. But look, if we don't choose A here because it's already been used, it was 9 out of 32 questions were A's before, and then we only have 3 out of the remaining 20 questions for a reason, because that equates to 12 out of 52. That's about right in terms of the average. You should have 12 to 13 questions or bubbles for each one. So just don't choose A. And you're going to look back at your bubble sheet and you're going to see which column you've chosen the least. Or see which one you've chosen the most, and then do not choose that one. At this point, if you were 32 for 32, you would have chosen A the most. So you are not going to choose A the rest of the way. Instead, let's choose, we could choose any of the other ones. It doesn't matter which of the other ones you choose. Just choose any of the 3. Just don't choose the one that's been used the most. Let's choose D, for example. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 D. Right? We can choose any of them. We might get a little lucky by choosing one over the other, but if I choose B, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 B's, so 7 D's, 6 B's, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 C's. Okay? So you get, any of these will work. Again, you might get lucky by choosing the right one, right? Choose D and you might get lucky there. But if you chose B even, which is this is +5, if you focused as closely as you could on the first three passages, and then you picked a guessing letter that was not the most used one. Do not choose the most used one. Boom, 32 out of 52, all of a sudden becomes exactly what I said, 300. You get +5, and that wasn't even the best guessing letter. If you happen to get lucky and you chose D, you would have gotten 39, which would have been a 310. But I just chose the middle, right? You could also get unlucky and choose C. But I chose B. Actually, no, B had 6. So you would have gotten 38. You would have gotten same thing, 300. Guys, that means that if you answer 32 out of 52 questions right, and you skip 2 full passages on the reading test, that's around a 60%. That feels like a D- in school. That's what it would be in school, a D-. On this exam, a 300 is in the top 15% on the reading test. You would just get a 25% bump, 25 percentage point bump, just simply because you didn't stress. Does that all make sense? Can everybody give me a thumbs up if that makes sense? That is the single most important thing that you guys can review, that if you focus on accuracy, I don't know why it's not discussed. I don't know why it wasn't trained when I was going through these different programs as different companies when I was training to be a tutor for this stuff. But I have no idea why this wasn't discussed. It's the single most important thing, and it's the single thing that made me a great test taker as a kid and makes me a great test taker now. Now I know all the rules too, so that even helps more. And that means you can do things faster and you can be really consistent. But even as a kid, if I was only focused on what I knew how to do, I was going to do really, really well in these exams every single time. I was focused on accuracy, no simple mistakes, and then timing doesn't matter. Okay, so timing and your score should be the last timing. What's my score, right? How am I doing? Should be the last thing you guys think about. It should be, what's my goal number of questions? Everybody should write that down. What's my goal number of questions answered correctly? Questions answered correctly. That's my goal. And set it as reasonable and answered accurately, right? Set it as a reasonable number from your last practice test. If you want to bump it up by 10 points or 20 points, that's fine. But don't bump it up by 100. Then you're not doing what we're talking about, right? What's my goal number of questions? And from that moment that you find your score, your goal score, maybe it's a 330, right? 330 on this exam. Okay? Once you find that number, and then you find the number of questions, you do not think about the score one more second for the rest of the time you're taking the test. You only think about, how am I going to get to, what do I need to do to get to that number of questions answered correctly? How do I maximize my score? Yeah, Danielle, it's going to be available forever. So this comprehensive review, guys, will always, everything that we do is live streamed, is recorded. Okay? Everything that we do is recorded. So all of this stuff will be available immediately after. All you have to do is, yeah, guys, if you like this video, please make sure you subscribe to the channel, and hopefully you guys can tell your friends as well. We'd like to be doing these videos as much as we can, and we do live streams every day. If we had, probably instead of 15 students signing in, if we had 50, this would be a thing that we could do almost every day. So please tell your friends. We'd love to keep doing these videos. Okay, and it will be available, yeah. So Adriana, just because Adriana's if you can maybe just comment, because you scored really well, and if you feel comfortable, were you using this when you had your test? Were you using this method? Regardless, the coolest thing about this, guys, is regardless of what level you're testing at, it works for every level, right? And again, when I was a kid, I would never go into these exams thinking, how do I get an 800 or how do I get 100% on my final? It was always, how do I do the minimum to do well, to do my goal, right? I had a goal because I wanted to do well. I was really competitive in that way, but I also didn't have the work ethic or desire to, that stung. But still, on test day, I was locked in. I was focused. I was competitive. And again, when you guys see this, right, if you get 53 out of 58 questions, I knew that was a score that would be very satisfying for me, right, 740. And then I knew that I could guess on a few questions and probably pick up another one and maybe get to a 760. And that was good enough for me, right? Wasn't trying to get a 1600, but anything above a 1500 worked really well. And that was what I would do, right? Or 34 on the ACT. Those types of things were the thoughts. Now, if you have the work ethic to put in too, Now all of a sudden that 53 can become 57. You skip the single hardest question and now you're at an 800. But I use that as the example because whether or not you're trying to answer 3 passages on the reading or answer all 5, this is always going to work, that you skip the hardest question. Does that make sense, guys? Any other questions related to this? Any other questions at all? Before we move on to the individual sections? Before we move on to the individual sections of the test, any questions on this stuff at all, guys? Yeah, okay. Yeah, and Brianna, that's ultimately, at some level, guys, right? If you come back, if you have time at the end, don't take a nap, right? Brianna kind of alluded to that. The point I'm trying to make in all of this is kind of what she just alluded to. And I knew she had done well on a test recently, but she's been very participative in all of these live streams, trying to find out how I get 10 points better. The idea is if you have time at the end and you skipped a couple questions, don't go take a nap. Obviously, go back to those, as she alluded to in her post there, in her chat, in her comment there. But it means that in the moment, if you're feeling overwhelmed, you skip that, right? You skip that question so that if you have to come back to it, or if you run out of time, you've run out of time knowing that you skipped only questions you didn't feel comfortable with, rather than missing easy questions solely because the one right before it was hard and your mind is all warped now and you're feeling terrible, right? We don't want that. That's lack of momentum. If there's one thing I know, it's that lack of momentum will always be a terrible thing on a standardized test that's 3.5 hours long. If you move on from a question and come back to it too, sometimes you have a different perspective and all of a sudden you're like, oh man, that's so easy. Why didn't I not see that the first time? But when you're just buried in it and you keep trying something, you keep getting more and more frustrated, the next question and the next question after that becomes so frustrating. And that's not what we want to maximize our score. We want to hit the goal number first, right? If we hit 33, if our goal is 47 on the math test, if we've hit that 47 and we feel accurate and confident in those 47, we haven't panicked, as Abriana alluded to, right? We hit that 47 number and we realize, hey, well, I still have some time. Then yeah, go back. By all means, don't take a nap. But yeah, important. It's a great question. So what Spencer just asked, guys, is a great one. What happens if we don't know 2 or 3 of the free response questions on math? First and foremost, don't worry too much, right? Because it's only 13 of the questions total. But ideally, if you don't know the free response questions, you're gonna have very little chance of guessing those questions right. So we kind of want to dedicate a little bit more time to the free response questions in math, if we're being honest, because we know that we can't guess those questions correctly. Whereas the multiple choice, even if we're pretty sure we can get it, if it's equal between the free response and multiple choice in terms of our confidence level, go to the free response question because you can still guess the multiple choice one right. You can't really do that on free response. I mean, it's like 1 in a million, right, Spencer? So spend a little bit more time maybe on those questions, but yeah, you're basically just guessing. Look, if there's a figure, Spencer, right? If you're given a figure, maybe it's an angle, right? So if it's an angle and the angle looks like this, and they don't give you anything that says like the figure is not drawn to scale, well, obviously this portion of the circle or this angle right here is larger than 90 degrees. Is it? Yeah, it's larger than 90 degrees. I meant for it to be, right? So if you see this angle on the test, then and that's what they're looking for. This is the X angle, and obviously there's a problem associated with it. But if you see that, just make sure that you're guessing an angle that's above 90 degrees and probably below 120 degrees, right? So be somewhat aware of what you're guessing. But ultimately, those free response guesses just become, yeah, somewhat of a random guess, unfortunately. Yeah, so Abriana, it's exact. So what Abriana just said there is exactly right. In terms of it, you have to practice this. You have to psychologically go into the test knowing that it's okay if you skip a question, and it's okay if you don't get back to it. If you do get back to it, great. That's the perfect world. But if you don't, you've skipped the question that you've sat there for 30 seconds and been like, I have no idea what I'm doing. If you don't remember the circle equation or you don't remember the quadratic formula, you're not suddenly going to remember it, right? Generally speaking, that's 1 in 100 that you suddenly remember in a minute. And so if you don't remember that, it is what it is in the moment. Yes, you can beat yourself up about it afterwards, right? You can be like, oh, why didn't I just remember that? Why didn't I learn that? But don't do it in the moment of the test while the time is ticking, right? That's only hurting us more. And we want to try to move on from that, right? We don't want to beat ourselves up during the test. Don't think in your mind. You want all positive energy, all positive momentum. And that will make such a major difference. Yeah, and so Adriana is exactly right on that one too, Spencer. As soon as you guys get stuck on math multiple choice, I would move to the free response questions. One real quick thing, and then we'll get into the actual section reviews of this, guys. On the math section, let's just take the no-calc section as an example here. Right, there's 15 multiple choice questions, and generally speaking, it's not all the time, but generally speaking, those are in order of difficulty. So like 1 through 5 will be level 1, right? 1 through 5 will be level 1. And then 11 through 15 will be level 2 or 3. And as Ariana alluded to there, when you get down to the free response, right? When you guys get down to the free response questions, you get 16 through 20. Okay? And if you get those 16 through 20 questions done, and those are all free response questions, number 16 and sometimes number 17, right? These questions now go back to level 1 and 2. So I would highly recommend that if you guys get to question like number 11 on the multiple choice, same thing goes for the calculator section. It's just more questions, and we'll just leave it here so it's not. But same thing goes for the calculator section. If you guys get to a point where you feel overwhelmed, right, by a multiple choice question, make sure that you guys move on from that pretty quickly. Okay? Any other questions, guys? Any other questions just generally related to the score? And then we're going to go section by section. We're not going to go too in-depth here. Okay? Lizzie, thanks for becoming a gold member too. I just saw that in the comments. Guys, if you're interested in more of these too, a more like structured approach, we do have a 20-hour recorded classroom program. If you click join below the video, obviously you don't have to, but it's $30 a month, and it's just 20 hours of me. If you can stand listening to me for 20 hours, it's me going through 10 lessons and going through this very in depth 10 2-hour lessons, and we go through every section of the test. Okay, is that cool, guys? So yeah, again, if you want to join, you can. You just click join below the video, and we just go. Basically, we do what we're doing today, but instead of 2 hours, you get 20 hours. It's 10 times more in depth. Okay, if you don't want to do that, don't. At the very least, we hope that you guys like this enough to subscribe to the channel. Tell your friends. We want to keep making more of these free comprehensive reviews, and we'll keep moving, guys. Okay. All right, so everybody good to go? Can everybody give me one last 2 thumbs up here? Can you guys give me 2 thumbs up to say that you're good to go with the scores and the scales? Just 2 thumbs up in the chat, and then we'll move on to the SAT reading section. Okay, SAT reading. I don't know why I felt inclined to write that out, but I did. So if you guys are ready to go, we'll get moving. Everybody good? Great, thanks, Brianna. Perfect. Dima, thank you. All right, guys, perfect. So let's talk about SAT reading, okay? Looks like everybody's ready to go. If you guys don't have any questions, if you do have questions, we're going to go through each section individually and discuss it. Okay, there's 2 really, really important things to talk about when we relate to the SAT reading test. So before we start, though, guys, let me just post SAT test 6. I'm going to post the link to SAT test 6. That's the one we'll look through here. Okay, so we'll be using test 6. Move. You know you're getting old when your watch tells you it's time to stand up. And it's like it knows that my knees are just buckling right now, having sat down for so long. That's completely beside the point, but when you guys get older, you'll start to realize it. Okay? So SAT, I just pinned that to the top of the board. Okay, and then the last thing I want to do, we have one of the things that I think is really important that we talk about, and then I'll go back to this reading test. So SAT reading. Okay, guys, I highly, highly encourage you. The first thing we talk about the reading section always is that the reading section, because it's first and because it's the hardest section realistically, it just is, because it's the hardest section, it's really, really important that we do a warm-up. So on Tuesday, if you guys are taking the in-school test this coming Tuesday, I can't stress how important it is that you guys do a warm-up. And the beauty of what we tried to do, so for anybody a lot of you guys have probably already downloaded this, but I'd like everybody just to spend 2 seconds, and I'll post this in the link as well. I can't stress how important it is to warm up on Tuesday before you start any practice section. Okay, and what we tried to do is we created our Star U tutoring app, which you guys will see here in a second in the background of my screen. Okay, Star U is available in the App Store. It's free to download, and we put all of the content that our current SAT tutors write, okay, is right on the app. And I'll go through that here in a second, but I can't stress how important it is to be doing a warm-up. It's going to be on your phone, right? Star U, search in the App Store, right? App Store or Google Play. And the vast majority of the content that we write is available for free on Star U. Okay, or Star U desktop. Time. You're trying to access from a computer. Just post that in just a second. But I highly encourage you guys, again, it's free, so I don't know why, right? Create a student account. It takes 2 seconds. And the beauty of this is if you click ACT and SAT practice lessons on the home screen, you've created your student account. This is what the home screen looks like. You click ACT and SAT practice lessons. Okay, and then we're on the ACT page right now, so we're going to scroll over here to the SAT page. And then before you guys start the test, right, don't just go in. Think about everything else you guys do in your lives. If you're on a sports team, or if you're in the play or the musical, or if you're in any extracurricular, every single one of those you warm up for. And for sports and for the musical or the play, you show up like an hour early, right? So why in the world, if the SAT is the single most important thing of those by a million miles in terms of your future, it really is, unless you're going to be in the NBA, or you play NFL football, or if you're a star actor or actress, unless you're one of those things, this is infinitely more important to your future. Yet we see so many students that don't warm up. And it baffles me because we do that for everything else we do, yet on this test that's so important, we're standing in line, right, waiting to register, and we're just talking about something else, which this is so critical. It doesn't mean that you have to, lose your friends because you're standing in the corner and not talking to anybody. Don't do that. Okay, but what it does mean is that you should encourage you and your friends to just sit there and do a few practice problems, right? While you're standing in line to register, if you're taking the in-school test at your school on Tuesday, be doing some practice problems until you have to put your phone away for the test. And all you have to do, you log in, right? Create your student account, go to SAT on the home screen, and do some verb tense problems to get your mind thinking the morning of the test. And because it's all on your phone, it's exactly how you consume everything else that you do in your daily lives, right? Click punctuation. And this really leads into what we always talk about first with the SAT reading test. This is all writing and language, which is just an easier section. That's why that's why I click on that. But you guys can do some practice passages while you're standing in line. Those questions, those direct and evidence-based questions, the one that say, this word or whatever most nearly means, and then the very next question is where's the evidence for that in the passage, right? You can start talking or reading about these before the actual exam starts. Because a lot of times when it's 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning or on a Saturday morning, our mind is not thinking the way that it is on Thursday afternoon. And we got to recognize that. And we got to do everything in our power not to let that be the reason we miss questions early on in the test that we would have otherwise gotten right, but we just miss them just because. We don't want to do that, right? We want to do everything in our power to make sure that we're warming up, we're doing the things necessary to get in the right mindset for what we're about to do. And then we can get all the jitters and all that kind of stuff out before the actual exam starts. So I highly encourage you guys to check that out. It's free to download. 95% of the content is free on the app as well, right? You guys can click words in context. You can think about how our tutors approach this test and how we write about this and how you can look at each individual question on the exam. Okay, so I highly encourage you guys to do that, and I encourage you to do it next Tuesday, and as well as any SAT or ACT test you take in the future, because it's on your phone. You don't have to be carrying around a 700-page manual while you're standing in line and probably losing friends doing that, right? You can just be doing it on your phone, just like everything else you're doing. Nobody would ever question it. Okay? So just think about that, guys. So that's the most important thing. With the reading section especially, because it's the hardest section of the test, and I think it's the hardest by far, and I read a lot. I love the reading section is my favorite section, but I also think it's the hardest by far because it's so in-depth. Because the reading actually is so in-depth that you have to be focused while you read. All right, does that all make sense, guys? Can everybody give me a thumbs up if that makes sense in terms of the warm-up? Just getting in general and getting your mind set for the warm-up and why that's so important. Again, we do it for everything else in our daily lives. Why wouldn't we do it for this? All right, and then we'll jump back, and now we're looking again at SAT test number 6. SAT test 6. And everything that I write down here, guys, I think is really important in terms of your preparation between now and the actual exam. The reading test doesn't have a ton of, it just doesn't have a ton of content review, right? You either read a lot on your own or you don't in a lot of ways. And if you don't, I obviously want you to read a lot more than you're currently reading because that's a huge, huge benefit. I was a huge reader as a kid, and that helped me so much on every section of the test because you comprehend things. Even word problems in math, you comprehend what they're asking way faster if you read a lot more because you just do it. It's just an instinct, right? So please make sure that you guys are setting time. 20 minutes a day is not that much, right, for the day. 20 minutes a day to really buckle down and read an essay or read something that gets you ready to go for this exam. All right, so 20 minutes. And then the SAT reading section, guys, is hard, okay? It's difficult. SAT reading is hard. So we got to make sure that we're prepared. And there's a couple ways that we can do this. Because there's not a ton of content review on the reading section, like there is on the writing and language section with the grammar rules, or like there is on the math section, we got to figure out other ways to strategize to maximize our score on the section. And one really easy way to do that, is to recognize the passage order and to figure out which passages we tend to do the best on. Okay, so one, right, there's always 5 passages, and I'm going to write out what those 5 passages typically are. 4, 5, right? So one major thing that we get students asking questions about all the time is, well, how do I stay more focused? Well, first of all, again, reading more will always help with that because it's more natural. You've just done it more. But one other way that you can stay focused is by doing the passages based on your practice exams that actually are interesting to you. So the passages on the SAT reading test are always in the same order. It's always the narrative passage first. So everybody write this down if you could, if you didn't know this already. Okay, narrative first. Then there's a then there's a humanities passage. Sorry, guys. Okay, then it's like a humanities passage. Sometimes it's a biography. Then there's a social science passage, which tends to be one of the 2 passages with graphs. Social science, right? This tends to have the graphs and the figures. Graphs, figures, right? Then there's the U.S. history passage, which is typically the one that's written pre-1900. 1900s, right? That can either be the best thing in the world or the worst thing. If you like U.S. history, I do, so I like the 4th passage. Otherwise, sometimes students just get completely overwhelmed by it because the language is so old school. Okay, and then finally we get the natural science passage. Natural science is last. And so one thing that you guys can do, I don't know if you can do it before Tuesday, but maybe if you've taken enough practice tests to this point, you can do it before Tuesday. Okay, but you look at your practice tests and figure out where you're missing the majority of the questions. Or take an untimed test and see where you do the worst. Because if it's untimed, you should do equally as well on each section, right? Or theoretically. But if you notice that you're doing poor on one set of questions that's in one passage, don't do that passage. Save that passage, right? Honestly, guys, look. If you do 4 passages, as we just talked about, if you do 4 passages and then you guess the same letter on the last passage, 4 passages, and you eliminate the hardest passage for you at all times. You always eliminate that, right? So you're doing 4 out of 5. You're going to get 42 out of 42 on those 4 passages. and then you choose a guessing letter for the hardest passage that you don't want to do anyway, it's hard to stay focused on anyway, you're going to gain another 3 questions on that. So you get 45 out of 52, and you never have to lose your momentum. You never have to lose your momentum on that hard passage. You get 45 out of 52 questions, right? Which on this test number 6 would be as we were just discussing, right? Test number 6, if you got 45 right, that would be a 350. You'd be on pace for a 700. Okay, you'd be on pace for a 700 if you got 45 questions right. You get a 700, or you'd be on pace for that. This would be equivalent to a 350 on the reading section, and you never had to look at the hardest passage. So that's one thing that I would highly encourage everybody to do. Even if you're going to do all 5 passages, you still want to do your worst section. You want to do the worst passage for you, the one that you feel is the hardest. Do that one last, so that you're not losing momentum on the first 4. Everybody's always like, well, why wouldn't I want to do the hardest one somewhere in the middle when I'm a little warmed up? It's because that's the hardest passage. Even if you do it in the middle, you're sacrificing energy for an easier passage that you do later just to do a hard passage for no other reason. So do the hardest passage last always, because you can always guess on that passage and you're not hurting yourself on the other 4 that are more comfortable, that you feel better with. Does that make sense, guys? Can everybody give me 2 thumbs up if you guys have all of this stuff written down? Grace, great. Grace, thanks for signing up for the membership program. Again, with the membership, if you guys haven't seen it, you basically get 10 times this content. Everything that we're going over section by section is included in you click join in the membership below. It's $30 a month. I think it's well worth it. It's better than any textbook that you're going to spend for $30, if I'm being honest. It's better than our textbooks that's $35. So yeah, all the textbooks we write, if you use the app, which is free, and you do the membership below, again, you don't have to do that, but if you guys do, I think it's well worth it. So thanks, Grace, for signing up as a gold member. Thank you. Okay, guys, so look, if we do this and approach it this way, right, we don't have to in any way make this test feel overwhelming. It can be just one step at a time. Right? Guys, 350, right? If you're not already scoring a 350, imagine if you recognize this, imagine thinking that, oh man, I only have to do 4 passages. I only have to do 80% of the test, and I'm still scoring in the top, on the reading section, this would be in the top 3% of all students. So what feels like an 80% by doing 4 passages, if I'm accurate on those 4, what feels like an 80% actually equates to a 97%. Man, that feels pretty sweet, right? That's awesome. Again, this is the way this test is scaled, which is awesome for you guys. It's awesome for everybody if you adapt, right? If you actually implement these things, this can be a game changer. This can be a game changer. All right? Any questions generally about the reading test? I'm always a little hesitant, just for pure sake of making you guys feel too overwhelmed this close to the test. I'm always a little hesitant to answer too many very specific questions on this. But does anybody have any general questions on the SAT reading section? Do you have any general questions on SAT reading? We can talk about a few question types if you guys want. Okay, we can talk about a few question types. One of the important ones, one of the important question types that I think that most of you guys want to see are those direct questions, right? So direct questions are direct and then to evidence-based. So these questions are the ones that are direct first, where they ask about specific line numbers or a specific point in the text, right? So just normal question, essentially. And then the very following question is an evidence-based question. Evidence-based, meaning it says, Where is the evidence for the previous question? Where is evidence? Okay, everybody I think is familiar with this. Where's the evidence for this? One of the things that I love to do on these questions is to imagine that the second part of this doesn't exist. If it were me approaching this test, on Tuesday, what I would do is I would act like these question types don't exist. Even if you know that they're there, I would try to answer this because there are also, guys, there are plenty of these direct questions, right? There are plenty of these that don't have evidence. It's just a single question. There are a few then that add this evidence-based question, but if you approach the first one as if there isn't an evidence base, then generally speaking, you actually go find the line numbers that then resort to this evidence-based, right? So then the very next question, you've already looked in the right place because you've answered this one correctly. The reason I don't like to look at the line numbers on the second question but right before I do the first one is because it tends to bias me towards one of the answers. I would much rather you guys do the direct question first, try to answer that, right? Try to answer that in depth. Okay, and then when you turn to the evidence, it's almost like that evidence-based question is already answered for you. Does that make sense? Can everybody give me a thumbs up, guys, if that makes sense? Thumbs up, guys, if that makes sense. So again, those are those direct questions. Followed by those evidence-based questions. Great, thanks, Spencer. So if you approach these first, again, without thinking about the evidence-based, I think it becomes much easier to answer the evidence-based questions immediately after. Okay. All right, guys. So, anything else on the reading section? I'm going to keep moving. On reading, I'm going to keep moving. Oh, I guess the final thing is that our strategy for the reading section is without a doubt to thoroughly read the passage. And the reason we do that, there are other strategies that work, and you can do really well if you skim it, right? We've had students that have just not wanted to read the whole thing. But generally speaking, if you thoroughly read the passage, that always equals consistency. Okay, because when you do the skim method, right, where you skim it, or sometimes we have students that don't even read it at all, and they just immediately go to the questions, that does work sometimes. Spencer, great question on that last one, real quick, going back. Spencer, it honestly probably means that your direct question is, that the answer choice that you chose for the direct answer is wrong. If that's a great question. So that sometimes helps you make a determination, right? If you have an answer choice that you choose, and then you go and try to find the evidence for that answer choice, right? You look at the line numbers and confirm that that's where it was. Generally speaking, that means that the direct answer is wrong, which can give you a hint as to maybe that's not the right answer. But good question, right? Then you can maybe go back and think about it some more, right? And it's a good point to bring up because that does happen sometimes, right? Rather than going through and just being like, well, I think this is right for the evidence base, but I can clearly tell it's not right, right? Maybe we think to ourselves, oh, wait a second, maybe that means that my first answer wasn't right, and now I got to go back and check that one again. But good question there. Spencer, can you give me a thumbs up if that makes sense? Okay, again, one of the things that I wanted to bring up with this thoroughly reading idea, thoroughly read the passages. If it means you have to skip a passage because you're running low on time, we've already shown you that can still be you can still do exceptionally well on this exam. But thoroughly reading leads to consistency. Okay? Abriana just said it, right? And again, Abriana, just not to call her out here, but in a great way, she scored in the top, 1% of all students that take this exam, and she did that on the reading test as well. Okay? And she's been a part of all of these live streams. She's continued to put in the hard work, and that's a huge part of this. But then actually doing some of these things is really important as well. Because with the skimming method, right, where you just don't go to if you don't even skim it, you just go immediately to the questions, that does work maybe 1 out of every 4 tests. But what you guys are going to be fine with that method is you got to be so good about what the question types are. You got to be so consistent, and it is very difficult to do that with when you don't know what the passage is talking about. All that stuff that I was talking about in terms of trending downhill, right, going downhill and losing all your momentum, that happens so easily when you don't read the passage, because when you get to that moment of a hard question, it's just so easy to get frustrated because you can't find it, right, all that kind of stuff. When you thoroughly read the passages, and Adriana is a great example of this, and she just commented in the group, in the chat, which I'm very thankful for, because she did do really well, and it does really impact your score because you can be so consistent. When you thoroughly read, even if you have to guess on the whole last passage, you still know you still know kind of where you are, right? You know what you've done, you know that you've answered a lot of those questions correctly, because there isn't this moment of just overwhelming what is going on right now. You know what the passage is talking about, so there can't be that many questions that are that hard. There might be 3 hard questions per passage, but it's certainly not going to be all of them if you read everything thoroughly. Okay? Is that good, guys? Everybody ready to move on to the writing and language section? The writing and language explanation is really short. It basically is just saying, you guys, we got to be really good about memorizing our grammar rules. That's the biggest part about that. Got to be exceptionally good about memorizing grammar rules. And that's never going to be the fun thing to do. It's never going to be the first thing on our mind. But it is going to be very, very important that we do that. Very, very important. So guys, can you give me a good to go? Good to go? Everybody good? Great. I would just start reading thoroughly and then go to the questions. Great question. Jamil, great question. I wouldn't go to the questions first at all, because once again, that biases you. Right? When you go to the questions, now all of a sudden you're looking for that question. I can't stress this enough. It's a great question to ask. So thank you for doing that, because it's going to apply to a lot of you guys. Okay? Yeah, Adriana just alluded to it. Guys, look at this, right? What I want to point out to you is, if you would take an AP English class, okay, if you take an AP English class, Jamil, or you take an English class in general, you might have to read like 30 pages a night, right? 30 pages per night in a hard English class. Why this method works, if we really want to break it down, why thoroughly reading works, is because there's only 95 lines and it's double spaced, right? If you look at this reading section, it's 90. This is a long passage. Most of the lines are only. It's like usually 85 lines is average, right? 85 lines on most passages, and it's all double spaced. So what you're going to find is that if you really do read thoroughly, like if you're really invested, and sometimes that's hard to do because the passages aren't very interesting, it's your job to stay focused no matter what. Reordering the passages and skipping the one that you like the least or the one you do the worst on is always a good call. That's always a good start to finding interesting passages. But you got to be involved. But when you are thoroughly reading the passage and really thinking about what you're reading, really comprehending it without the stress of the questions coming up, but instead you're just really focused on reading, you guys will be absolutely amazed, right? You'll be absolutely amazed at how much you retain. When you get to the questions, you read it and you're like, oh yeah, I just read that. Because it was only 95 lines or 85 lines. There's that detail. If you are really thinking about the passage and reading thoroughly, you will be amazed at how much you retain when you get to the questions, right? Then you start reading the questions, read the questions, then you go to the answer choices, you look at the answer choices, and you think to yourself, okay, did that make sense? Do I remember reading that? No? Okay, that answer choice is marked off. Yeah, exactly, right? When you don't read thoroughly, there's so much inconsistency with the amount of time it takes per passage. One day you get all questions right, and then the next day you miss 10 questions because we don't know what the passage is going to ask us. Okay, but great question there, Jamil. That was a great one. That's going to apply to everybody. So anybody that's watching the recording after this, I forgot to mention that, but that's a huge reason why. Guys, in terms of the SAT versus the ACT being easier or harder, there's about 80% crossover between the two tests now. Since 2016, when the SAT changed back to this current format, when they went back to the 1600 scale, there's about 80% crossover. So honestly, guys, at this point, it's only about preference. It really is. If you take a test, if you like really fast tests, the ACT is probably better. ACT is much faster. You have much less time, but the questions are much easier. If you're more methodical and analytical, The SAT has far fewer questions in equal time. The ACT and the SAT have the same amount of time, but there's 65 more questions overall in the ACT than there are in the SAT. So SAT question types are just harder. But if you like analytical, right, methodical thinking, the SAT is probably the test. If it's the other way around with the ACT, if you like fast, easier questions, you just have to keep moving, right? It's just all about moving forward on the ACT. Then the ACT is probably the test for you. All right, guys? So I think everybody looks like they're good to go for that reading test. Let's move on, guys, to the writing and language section. Okay, let's move on to the writing and language section. So, guys, with the writing and language test, this is section number 2 always, and there's a huge, huge component to this. There's a huge, huge component to this. We're going to release a video today or tomorrow. That's a real-time video for the March 2021 SAT writing and language. And I mentioned this earlier, but in this video, I'm going to try to answer. This is the first time I had seen the test, but the reason that I do, if you've seen some of our other real-time videos, it's going to be similar. But for the first time, I tried to go through as a demonstration to how important these grammar rules are. And I tried to answer, there's 35 minutes typically for this test. I tried to get 100% in 20 minutes. Okay, so I tried to answer all the questions correctly in 20 minutes. I said that's what the timer set for. And I didn't do that, right? Guys, I didn't do that. I didn't do that to show you guys that I know all the grammar rules. I mean, it's not that cool of an accomplishment to be showing 18-year-olds that I know how to do punctuation rules. That's not that cool. I'm not cool because of that. I did it to show you guys the importance of knowing your grammar rules. That if you know every punctuation rule, that rule never changes. That's why it's called a rule. So we try to do it in 20 minutes to show you that you can get through all of the grammar questions in I don't know, there's going to be 30 out of 44 of the questions. 30 out of 44 questions are going to be grammar questions. And I did it to show you guys that if you answer those 30 questions correctly, it's like my dog wants out now to get her toy. Go on. Get out there. Okay? If you guys know all of your grammar rules, those 30 questions can all be answered, right? 30 questions can all be answered in 10, 15 seconds each. If you think about the advantage that gives you, let's just call it 15 seconds, right? Just to be conservative. Think about that, guys. That's only 450 seconds, right? 450 seconds. That's 7.5 minutes. 7.5 minutes on the grammar question. That leaves you with 28 minutes. 28 minutes to answer the remaining 14 questions, like the main idea and organization. Should the sentence be placed here? What should the author add this? Where should the sentence go in the passage? Whatever, right? That gives you 28 minutes to answer those 14 questions, 2 minutes per question, solely by taking the time and the effort to memorize your grammar rules. If you read often, right, going back to how important it is to be a big reader for these tests, if you like to read, a lot of times you don't even have to memorize your grammar rules. Because for me, there's no way that I was going to be motivated enough as a kid, right, to want to memorize grammar rules ever. But I was also a huge reader. So if you think about this, whenever you read a published work, right, if you read something, if you like sports, you read ESPN, right? Or if you like plays and you read plays, right, you read a playwright. Or if you like novels, you read novels, whatever. Every time you read something that's published, that has an actual editor. That's why it's called an editor that's going through and checking for grammar errors. Now, they're not going to get everyone down, but 95% of published material is grammatically correct. 95% of that. So that means that every time you sit down to read a book, you're practicing the grammar section, right? You're practicing writing and language without having to do anything, without actually sitting down and memorizing rules. That's why I had an advantage on this section as a kid, because I love to read. If I love to read and I'm seeing all the proper grammar used all the time, then when I get to a quick test like this, I'm going to go back to that proper grammar that I remember somewhere deep in the recess of my brain from reading some article at some point. So does that make sense in terms of how important it is to not only read for the reading section, but how important it is to read for the writing and language and the math sections in reality for the word problems? How important that is to be really good at reading comprehension. Can everybody give me 2 thumbs up? 2 thumbs up if that makes sense. And then more importantly, right, when you see this video come out, this real-time video for the writing and language test from 2021, when you guys see that video come out, watch how important it is to memorize the grammar rules. For those that have seen our other real-time explanation videos, where I'll take these tests in real time, I'm much more talking to the camera and going through it. In this one, I just sit down and try to go through it as fast as I possibly can with in terms of accuracy. But I'm trying to show you guys that you can do this if you memorize all these grammar rules. That every single time you just get faster and faster because you recognize what the question is asking really, really quickly. And that's not because I just was born with great grammar. It was because I read a lot and I've now done this forever. And I've seen so many of these grammar questions that I just know what a semicolon does. Right? Right off the bat, I know exactly what they're testing me when I see a semicolon in the answer choices, so I know what to look for. And that's where you guys can get too. Okay? So just in terms of the going back to that talking about Star U and our app, the biggest help for this that Star U gives you is actually on the writing and language section. Again, I don't want to plug that too much in terms of trying to promote our stuff, but it does give you a massive advantage because on the app, if you guys haven't created a student account yet, what the app really does well is it breaks down every single writing and language test in a very, very detailed manner. So as I go back here, if I were you, the questions that I would answer, okay, and you guys will see this is all available for free. Okay, let me just, I guess, write this out first. Oops. Okay, so the easiest question types to memorize are the most important ones. For your writing and language test, where can I find some space here? Okay, the most important ones are punctuation by far, and I'll show you guys that in a second. You should memorize all punctuation rules, and I'll show you guys the tab for that in the app. Okay, apostrophes and confused words, apostrophes, those come up often on the SAT writing and language. You should be very familiar with pronouns. What do pronouns do? And then you should be very familiar with verbs. Okay, and specifically related to verbs, the tense, right? Verb tense and subject-verb agreement. Okay? Plural versus singular. And again, the beauty of this, guys, is if you, and Adrian is a good example of this, somebody who's really, really taken this stuff to heart and done this practice, is it's all for free right here. This is why I don't feel bad anymore, because I've seen enough students where we've given you the resources. All of this is right here, right? If you need to learn about verbs, go to subject-verb agreement. It's available for free on your phone. Go read about subject-verb agreement, right? Get better at subject-verb agreement if you see in your practice test that you're not doing as well on these grammar rules. I just listed out the 5 most important grammar rules, and I'll go back to that in a second. That if you guys go back and read these, right, and you just sit there and memorize subject-verb agreement, you'll never forget it. It is why it's called a rule. It doesn't change. It's a rule. It never changes. So if you know how to see this, right, and you see a verb in the answer choices on the SAT writing and language test, now you know what to be looking for. Okay, so it's very, very important that you guys memorize these grammar rules because this section can be the easiest, by far, the easiest section of the test if you want it to be. It can also be very difficult if you don't want it to be and if you're not putting in the time and the effort beforehand. Okay, so let me give you guys a perfect example of this. As we go back here, okay, can everybody give me a thumbs up if you guys have these written down? These are the 4 most important sections that you guys can review. And all of the Star U breaks down every single one of these individually. I guess this is 4, and this should really be 4A and 4B because these are 2 separate sections in the app. But it breaks it down. It's everything that our current SAT tutors have seen over the last 4 practice tests or 5 practice tests. We edit it every time a test comes out. This March 2021 test that just came out, we're using that to see if there's anything new that we need to include in the app, and we're adding it. Okay? And let me show you what this means, guys. Look, if we come over here and we go down, on every single one of these exams, there is a punctuation. If we know, right, guys, if we know our rules here, our punctuation rules, we know right away, what does a period do, right? What does a comma do? On this next question, here's another punctuation, right? If you guys can identify this and you know all the rules, if you guys can do this, you will be amazed at how many questions you can answer correctly. There's 2 punctuation questions right off the bat. Look at, here's a colon, here's a dash. 3 of the first 4 questions on the SAT test number 6 were punctuation. 3 of the first 4. If you have every one of the rules memorized from the punctuation section, every rule that you could possibly know about punctuation, you never miss that question because it's a rule. Okay? Right here, apostrophes, right? I said apostrophes was really important. Okay, so don't be afraid, guys, to make sure that you do that. Okay, apostrophe, super, super important. Okay, so again, once again, can everybody give me a thumbs up? Give me a thumbs up in the chat or thumbs up below the video if all of these, you have all of these memorized, and then we'll move on. Okay, thumbs up as well, guys, if you're ready to move on. Thumbs up if you're ready to move on. But this is the single most important thing. Because if you guys memorize this, then you have plenty of time to do those main idea and organization questions, transition word questions. You have so much time to do those that those all of a sudden become really easy, because the only reason those are hard is if you're having to rush through it. And if you're not rushing, then then those questions are also very easy. And that's just what the benefit of memorizing your grammar rules really becomes. Awesome, guys. Perfect. Thanks, guys. Jose, Adriana, Jamil, great. Okay, so hopefully all of that stuff makes sense, guys. All right, let's keep going. Let's go to the math sections. Okay, math obviously is the final step here. You guys can see we already have some writing here from previous live streams, I think. So guys, remember that on the math section, what we tried to accomplish, because math comes second, right? Because math, or it comes after the other two sections, we need to figure out a way to stay systematic and task-oriented on the math section. Okay, so basically what that means is we need to find a goal number of questions. That's the first and foremost, right? First priority is find the goal number of questions, and this is true of the other sections as well, but it's particularly true of math. Goal number of questions you want to answer correctly. Goal number of questions you want. The app is Star U, guys. I posted the links and the info a little bit above. I'll just copy and paste this. Okay, so goal number of questions you want to answer correctly. That's the first priority. You answer. Priority number one. Okay? So once we have this down, now our goal needs to be to actually reach that number, right? It doesn't help us if we don't reach that number of questions. So we find the goal number. So I want everybody to set a goal before you take the test next week. Everybody needs to set a goal before you take this test next week. Okay? Goal number of questions. And as you get into the math, right, as you get into that, we have to figure out a way to be very task-oriented and systematic as we try to approach this exam. And we have what we call the Star Tutors 3-pass method, 3-pass math method. And again, what this is trying to do for you guys is to recognize what you're experiencing on the actual test, right? I understand that many of you guys don't need to skip questions if you are taking this in the perfect environment and you've done the best you've ever done in your life, right? But then you don't need to listen to this either. If you're doing the best you can possibly do on every single test and nothing ever affects you, then you're the best test taker ever, and that's great. But you don't need this. What I'm trying to get at is if on Tuesday the math section, one of the math sections is really hard for whatever reason, I want you guys to recognize that that's a great thing for you. If you're watching these videos of our strategies, right? If you've been watching these and you're watching tonight, that is a great thing if the test is really hard. Because while everybody else is stuck and frustrated on one really hard question that we already acknowledged is really hard, you guys are moving on to the questions that you know how to do. Right? You're moving on to the ones you know how to do. So what we're trying to accomplish in the 3-pass method is on pass number one, pass one, right? Regardless of whether or not, you have to think about this on how you're actually feeling on test day. Okay? You're going to approach this and you're not going to do the questions in order. Okay, pass one. You're going to find the 5 easiest questions that you can find. 5 questions that just immediately seem really easy to you. 5 easiest questions. Okay, that's step 1. Okay, and this is going to be used as a warm-up. You're going to try to use this as a warm-up. Because again, we always get pushback on this strategy being like, well, why am I going to skip questions? I know how to do number 2. yes, you do know how to do number 2, and you're going to do question number 2, but if number 2 is a word problem for whatever reason, and you've just completed the reading section and then you complete the writing and language section, doing a word problem when you haven't thought about math, but you have been reading and writing so much, is very, very likely that you make a simple mistake on that problem. So don't start there, right? 5 easiest questions and no word problems. We're trying to use this as a true warm-up to find questions that we absolutely 100% know how to do and require very little thought. We're trying to get into the right math mindset here. So can everybody give me a thumbs up if that makes sense? Task number 1, what I want you guys to do. You're gonna do this on both sections of the test. So this is math with calc, math no calc, and math with a calc. Math with calc. Okay, you do that on both sections of the test. You find the 5 absolutely easiest questions, because right there, guys, you know that you're now 5 for 5. You know you're 5 for 5. That feels great. You're off to a great start. You're already moving in the right direction. So you're 5 for 5. That's where we want to start with this thing. Okay, so that's pass number 1. Any questions on that? On Tuesday, I think it would be really, really beneficial that you guys do this. If we do it perfectly, and we get 5 out of 5 on both pass 1s for the no calc and the calculator section, we're already 10 of the 58 questions and we haven't stressed for 1 second. We have already answered 10 out of 58 questions and we haven't stressed out about any questions for 1 second. Because we're not focused on the single hardest question that we could possibly be focused on, and we're not focused on a word problem, right? Instead, we're focused on questions that are really easy and really straightforward. So that's pass 1. Now, pass 2 is really important and corresponds back to what we just talked about with your goal score. So if you're 10 for 10 on that, right, pass 2 is trying to find the number of questions you need to answer in order to reach that goal score. So as an example, as I turn back here to the actual score, the scales and the scoring for test 6, right, as I look at this, and there's just so much here now, erase some of this stuff, guys. Okay, pass 2 is you're going to have your goal number of questions in mind. We're already assuming that you've answered 10 of those questions right. Okay, so at this point on the math test, we're 10 for 10. Because we know going in that we're going to find those 5 easy ones, and we're going to be 100% accurate. So after pass number 1 for both sections, obviously you won't do them at the same time, but after pass 1, you guys are 10 for 10. That's a great feeling, and everybody can do 10 questions on this test, I guarantee it. Right? Everybody can do 10 questions on the math sections. Get 10 of those done. You're pass 1, and you're 10 for 10. Okay? And now, from there, your goal is on each section to recognize what the total amount that you want to answer correctly is. So let's say your goal is a 600 on the math test, which means that you have to answer 38 questions right. That means that you can skip 20 questions. Okay, so if we just do the simple math there, right, 38 out of 58 is roughly 2/3. Okay, 38 out of 58 is roughly 2/3 of the questions. There are 20 questions, right, 20 questions on the no calc section, 20 questions on no calc. Does that make sense, guys? 20 questions on no calc. So if we know we need to get 2/3 of those questions right, we're going to try to shoot for 13 questions. So now if we go back, okay, if we go back to our actual test 6, right, what we're looking for here is 5 out of 5 on pass 1, and if we're trying to get a 600 on the math test, our goal then for the no calc section, very task-oriented, right? We're very task-oriented in this approach. Our goal for the no calc section is to get 8 additional questions right. 8 out of the remaining questions. So you only have to get 8 out of 15. You can skip 7 questions if you do this method correctly. Okay, and then on the calc test, if your goal is to get a 600 overall on the math test, you get the first 5 right on the calculator section, and then your goal is to get the next, we're trying to get 28 more, so 20, right? You're trying to get 20 of the remaining 33 questions. I guess this should be closer to 9, huh? Good math, Chase. 10 or 10. Yeah, this should be 10. Sorry, guys. This should be 10 out of 15. Right? So that's our goal. If we can do that, we're going to hit our goal score. And then we're going to remember that we also get the necessary bump, right? We get the needed bump of pass number 3, where we get to choose a guessing letter. And that's going to give us a few more questions right. So pass 3, right? We choose a guessing letter. Choose guessing letter. And it's got to be the same one. Choose guessing letter for all skipped questions and use that guessing letter for the rest of the test. And you're going to guess that letter all the way down, and you're going to pick up probably, let's say, 2 more questions, which is 20 points. So you end up, guys, getting 40 to 42 out of 58 questions solely because you have a task-oriented approach. You know what you're doing. You know what number you're trying to reach. You know what you're trying to accomplish. And if you do this in this strategy, this order, and you have a goal number in mind and you have that memorized, I promise you your score will go up on the math section on Tuesday. I promise. Because now you're thinking about it in terms of the number of questions you need to answer correctly, rather than thinking about it in terms of, right, in terms of what's my score going to be. And if I don't get this score, then I don't get into this school and I'm a failure. That's the worst situation in the world. That's the worst mindset that we can possibly have on this type of test. Instead, you're thinking, I got to find 38 out of 58 questions that I can answer between these 2 math sections, so I better get going. And I'm going to start by answering easy warm-up questions first. Then I'm going to go back to the beginning. Watch how easy this can be. Okay, so I already wrote this out here, but number 1 and number 2, this is a really complex word problem. Even if it's really easy, that's a lot to read right after just completing the reading section and the writing and language section. Right? This is just a very overwhelming feeling to see questions 1 and 2. And if you guys see those same 2 questions next Tuesday when you take the exam, don't do them right away. Don't start with those questions. Right? And to a certain extent, 3 and 4, right? If you're not familiar with complex numbers, this might feel overwhelming. This is a really easy question and straightforward if you know this term complex numbers. And this time they're only looking for the sum. So all you have to do is say 2 plus 3i plus 4 plus 8i and combine like terms. Right? So we're just combining this. We're combining this. We get 6 plus 11i. That's it. That's all you have to do for number 3. So that's a really straightforward question as long as you don't get overwhelmed by this term complex numbers. If immediately you start to gasp for breath because you're like, I have no idea what that means, just don't do number 3. Let me show you what number 5 looks like, guys. Number 5 is the single easiest question on this entire test. It's something that all of us have done so many times. It's a simple y equals mx plus b problem for number 5. I can't tell you how often it is that we see students make simple mistakes on this question solely because they've been doing difficult questions earlier in the test. We have y equals 2x minus 5. Right away, we can eliminate answer choice B because that's a negative slope, right? That's going up into that way. We have a positive slope, m is equal to 2, and b is equal to negative 5. So let's see, which one crosses? Oh, it's got to be D, right? That's the only one that has a y-intercept down here at negative 5. Think about how easy that question is versus doing the word problem at question number 1. So this would be part of your first pass. You would maybe even skip all of the questions. I think these first 2, 3 and 4 are generally pretty straightforward, right? Here we're just trying to distribute. We get 4x squared minus 9 is equal to p of x, right, plus t. We remember like difference of 2 squares, right? We'll just know the value of p has to be 2 because this is just going to be 2x plus 3, right, times 2x minus 3. So that can be a really straightforward problem. But if it's not, if you're looking at that question and you don't feel comfortable, don't do to question number 4. Go immediately to 5 because everybody should feel comfortable with number 5. And maybe that's where you start as your pass number 1. And you try to get number 5 done because instead of looking at very overwhelming word problems, now we're looking at one of the easiest questions on the test. Overall, right? Y equals mx plus b. It's a linear equation and they give you the graph of it. The number 5 is extremely straightforward. There is absolutely no reason to miss question number 5 just because we're feeling overwhelmed with questions 1 and 2. Let's get to 5 first if that's worth the same value as 1 and 2, yet is so much easier. Especially at this point in the test when you guys have already done so much reading to that point. Don't do that, right? Don't do a bunch of reading to this point in the test and then do more reading when you get to the math section, when you're expecting to see math. Okay? Does that all make sense, guys? Can everybody give me a thumbs up if that generally makes sense? Thumbs up in the chat, guys, if that generally makes sense. And that's true of both math tests. So we're not going to go to the calculator section because the calculator section is the same anyway. But the idea behind what we're trying to accomplish here is to find a goal number that you feel confident you can achieve and to go strive to find that number. If it's 38 questions, that's what your goal is. If it's 38, stick to 38, right? If it's 38, don't suddenly start looking for 58 because you feel good about the first two, right? Stick to 38, which means that on the 20 hardest questions, right, we can skip 20 hard questions. It's awesome, right? It would be crazy not to approach the test this way next Tuesday, because that means we can skip 20 questions and still reach our goal score. Right? Jamil, I'm thrilled that you're going to use that strategy, because I can't tell you how important it is to do that. I know that skipping questions can feel overwhelming at times because of the way that we've always taken school tests where we don't want to skip questions because we don't feel like we know the answer. That's not how this test works, where every question is worth the same value. If that's true and there are easier questions and there are harder questions, yet they equal the same thing, then we need to get all of the easy questions done first, because that's without doubt the most efficient and best way to raise our score, to maximize our score. All right, guys? So for the most part, that's pretty much it for me in terms of content. What time do we have here? Hey, does that all make sense? Is everybody feeling pretty comfortable with this stuff? Hopefully. Any other general questions? Because that's about it in terms of the overall content review or strategy review that I want to talk about. But does anybody else have any general questions related to this stuff? Any general questions? You guys are doing such a great job. I can't tell you how much I appreciate all of the great questions you guys have already asked tonight. Any other general questions? And it can be anything. At this point, guys, now you can ask me any questions that you have. I'll leave maybe the next 10 to 15 minutes open for any general questions. If you guys are good to go, just say good to go in the chat, and I know we can sign off early. But I can't tell you how much I appreciate all the hard work, the ability to want to tune in for a 2-hour review like this. While I know how important it's going to be for you, and how much opportunity getting a good score on this test can be, more scholarship money, different schools, right? While I understand that, it's amazing. It's still really difficult to want to do this stuff. It's not very fun. It's not very exciting compared to everything else you can do in your lives. And so the fact that you guys are putting in the hard work and doing this stuff, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. It means a ton to me to have you guys here. It makes me want to do more to help you guys, and do more of these live streams. So great job tonight. Great job making sure that you're pushing through this. Okay? All right, guys. So it looks like everybody. Whoa, wait a minute. Yeah, good question. So, Jamil, on the writing and language test, it's less important. The bigger thing on Tuesday, that might be true. Okay, on Tuesday that might be true. You can use writing and language. You can either choose to do the grammar questions, all of the grammar questions first, because you don't need a ton of context for the passage. Right? You can do that. Bye, Abriana. Thanks so much for participating again. Great job. You don't need as much context for the passage, so you can choose to do all the grammar questions first, or Jamil, you can do all of it in order. Right, because the idea is that on the writing and language test, those main idea questions like where should the author place this, all those questions, those actually are really easy if we know we have enough time. And by memorizing all the grammar rules, every single time you sit down and take that test, you're going to know you have enough time, right, to get through it. And so the key there is just to make sure you memorize the grammar rules, because then you can take the whole thing in order if you want, or you can do all the grammar questions first all the way through, and then come back to the beginning and do the main idea questions where you do need more reading and context. But either way, you know that you have plenty of time to spend on those main idea questions. And that ultimately is the most important thing, because those questions become easy if you do have that time. Jamil, does that make sense? Either one of the strategies, though, works. Because generally speaking, on the writing and language test, the questions themselves are not too hard. It's much more about getting to a point where we know that they're not too hard. Can you give me 2 thumbs up if that makes sense? 2 thumbs up in the chat if that all makes sense. Okay, perfect. Never mind. I just saw your comment. That's great. All right, guys. Otherwise, yeah, have a great rest of your day. This is all going to be available as a recording as soon as we're done here, so you guys can always go back and rewatch the stuff we talked about tonight. But make sure that you try to stick to the number of questions you want to answer correctly rather than feeling totally overwhelmed by a certain score. Stick to the number of questions you want to answer correctly, and I promise this will go really well next Tuesday or whenever it is that you take your next SAT exam. All right, guys? So thank you so much tonight. Way to participate. Way to work hard. You guys are going to do great next Tuesday. If you have any questions for us between now and Tuesday or between now and your next test, you can always comment below these videos, and one of our teachers or tutors will always respond and answer your questions. But otherwise, guys, have a great rest of your night or a great morning wherever you are in the world, and we will see you guys. We'll see you guys for our next live stream review. If anybody's interested, next Thursday we'll have an ACT review for the April 17th ACT exam. So look out for that, and we'll have 2 SAT real-time videos being released tomorrow and on Saturday. So those will be available for you guys to watch.